The United States and its allies, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and the United Kingdom, have launched a new initiative called Partners in the Blue Pacific. Why one more grouping, you may ask? You already have NATO, Quad, AUKUS. Why another one? Now, ostensibly, this grouping, the Blue Pacific, is for effective and efficient cooperation with the small island nations in the Pacific Ocean. There are 10 small island nations in the Pacific Rim, from Fiji to the Solomon Islands. The areas where the Blue Pacific aims to enhance cooperation include climate crisis, connectivity, maritime security, and of course, health and education. Geostrategic competition has increased in the Pacific Straits of late after China expanded its footprint by pushing for a sweeping common cooperation agreement with all 10 Pacific countries. As China signed a security pact with the Solomon Islands back in April, that deal flagged off some serious concerns about the Chinese military possibly getting a military base in the southern Pacific. Remember, the Solomon Islands are close to the US island of Guam. They're also right next to Australia and New Zealand. On Crux Decode, could the Pacific Islands be the next theater of a possible war after Ukraine and possibly Taiwan? And why are both the US and China wooing these tiny island nations with a minuscule population? The Chinese deal boosted Beijing's quest to dominate some of the crucial shipping lanes that are there in this region. As a fallout, it rattled the United States and its allies. It also triggered urgent moves to counter China's growing ambitions and what seems like a power vacuum in the Pacific Rim. But Beijing did not just stop there with a statement of its intentions. It followed up on this with its Foreign Minister Wang Yi undertaking a multi-nation tour to push the 10 Pacific countries to endorse what he called a game-changing agreement. That agreement was called the Common Development Vision. But something happened in the midst of this 10-nation blast that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was on. By the time he ended his Pacific tour, the deal ran aground. There was a pushback by the government in Australia, as well as some of the governments in the Pacific Rim as well. They were worried about becoming a part of Beijing's orbit. Now, despite this setback, China has indicated that it has every intention of continuing to pursue this goal, a common development architecture as far as the South Pacific is concerned. And China is not keeping quiet. In fact, Chinese President Xi Jinping has proposed a global security initiative that was outlined back in April by his Vice Foreign Minister Le Yucheng. The GSI is basically aimed at creating an Asian security framework, one that could possibly be a counter to NATO and Quad, something that would ostensibly replace confrontation, alliance, and what the Chinese call a zero-sum approach to dialogue, partnership, and win-win results. Now, this move also comes at a time when Beijing is getting increasingly concerned that the NATO countries might expand their influence in the Asia-Pacific. In fact, Beijing has already called the Quad an Asian NATO, something which has not been taken too kindly by America or its allies. China is also wary of being flanked on the east by countries like Japan, South Korea, even the Philippines, all of whom are treaty allies of the United States. In its 2019 strategy report, the US Department of Defense had called the Indo-Pacific the single most consequential region for America's future. It went on to say that it spans a vast stretch of the globe from the west coast of the United States to the western shores of India. This region, the Indo-Pacific, is home to the world's most populous country, which is China, the most populous democracy, which is India, and the largest Muslim majority country, which is Indonesia. This whole arc from California all the way to Sri Lanka, that includes over half of the Earth's population. Out of the 10 largest standing armies in the world, 7 of them are in the Indo-Pacific. And 6 countries in this region possess nuclear weapons. 9 of the world's 10 busiest seaports are also in this region. In fact, 60% of all global maritime trade goes through the Indo-Pacific. Now back to the security architecture which Beijing has been floating. It's called the GSI, the Global Security Initiative. Now, Beijing will take some steps to try and bring big countries like India and other South Asian countries under this overarching Asian security architecture. Now, this is being seen as a direct response to the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad, of which India, Australia and Japan are a part, and also AUKUS, which is Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States, which is a trilateral security pact between these 3 countries. Now, China's hope is that the GSI would bring some of these nations under the Indo-Pacific Strategic Framework. In fact, Xi Jinping had proposed to lay out the GSI at the annual Boao Forum. It is like the Davos of Asia. Now, this happens in April, and Xi Jinping, in that speech at the Boao Forum, had said that this major initiative offers a fundamental solution to eliminating the peace deficit in Asia. He also went on to say that this could contribute Chinese perspectives in meeting international security challenges. But it's not the global aspect alone which is pertinent here. There's also a very important domestic reason why Xi Jinping is pushing for this in this current year. The Chinese Communist Party will be holding its 20th Party Congress in the latter half of this year, most likely in November. And in that Party Congress, President Xi Jinping will most likely claim the post of Chairman of the Communist Party of China. Now, this post has only been occupied by the founder of the modern-day People's Republic, Mao Zedong. No other Chinese leader, no other General Secretary of the Communist Party till date has held the position of Chairman of the CPC. Now, this also comes at a time when Xi Jinping's pet project, the pet infrastructure project, which he had launched with a great deal of fanfare some years ago, the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, is facing multiple challenges. There's been a massive disruption, of course, because of the COVID pandemic. Many countries are cutting back on infrastructure spending. China itself is cutting back infrastructure spending. Also, many countries who were part of BRI were coming under severe and intense debt because of these heavy-duty infrastructure projects. Case in point being both Pakistan as well as Sri Lanka. Then, of course, China had invested big time through the BRI in Afghanistan. And now there is a new dispensation that they have to deal with there in Afghanistan under the Taliban. And of course, to top all of this, there is the Ukraine war. So because of all of these factors, the Belt and Road Initiative itself had run into some very serious opposition, or some very serious headwinds, if you will. And add to that the frameworks that the United States has championed over the last few years, from the Quad to AUKUS to the 5-nation missile treaty agreement that they have between Canada, Australia, the UK and the US, and of course, most recently, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which was seen as some kind of a response to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, which China has with the ASEAN countries. So put all of this together, it's very clear that the Pacific Islands, small as they are, and with a sparse population that they have, could potentially become the next theater of great power games between the United States and China.